after Adam and Eve ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they had this dynamic. They had to come up with understanding ethics, okay, understanding how to live with all the problems involved. And then the world went off there. There was philosophy, there was ethical analysis, and there was some legitimacy to that investigation. We have to make a decision. How do we make a decision? We have to teach people to figure out. Okay, we all have these feelings. How do we make the decision between these feelings and evaluate them, and so forth and so forth? Okay, that's the state that we come to in terms of understanding what humanity is all about. Okay, before we come to Revelation, to understand that that's the state before Revelation. Revelation is not given to blank pages. It's not given to people who have no consciousness of right and wrong. Revelation is given to human beings who already have consciousness, drives, feelings, understanding of values. Okay? So now that God, yeah.
But isn't it revelation would be given because it's what obviously as you described, all the stages of the flood and whatever, it wasn't enough.
Well, the fact is that it didn't have revelation. Although
up to Noah.
Well, up to Noah, there wasn't that revelation. We have the truth is there are midrashim that say that God gave of the 7 Noahide laws, God gave 6 to Adam. Right? The one he didn't was the law of eating from the limb of a live animal, because before Noah, right? People, Adam and Eve were well. It's a question: were they vegetarians? But they didn't kill animals for food. They didn't kill animals for food. There are some viewpoints that say that if they found a dead animal's carcass, they may have eaten it, under law. But the understanding was that they didn't kill animals. But the interesting issue is that. So that's why they say the law against Ava min Achai, the law against a limb from Leviathan, doesn't exist. But wait a second, there was still, from what this person is saying, there seemed to be a law not to eat and not to kill animals for meat. So obviously there was something else happening here. But the point is that basically, in a lot of ways, the flood came about because people were really messing up on their own intuitive understanding of good and evil. They were messing up. They didn't know how to do it. And that's really what God was saying. Human beings, you have to figure this out. And they were really botching up. What were they doing? They were the flood and the Tower of Babel. They were really botching up. They weren't making such decisions. And even after Noah, they gave them God did give some revelation, the 7 laws of Noah to Noah. Right? But even there, Tower of Babel, was that in contravention of any of the 7 Noahide laws? Did they actually do something in contravention of the 7 Noahide laws?
Depends what they were doing on the tower. Supposedly they were idol worshipping. That's what I've heard different...
Interesting question. If it was idol worshipping, then it wasn't the Tower of Babel that they were doing. Unless you want to say they were worshipping.
They were worshipping on the
they might have been worshipping themselves. It might be blasphemy. The question is, what was the problem in Sodom? What was the problem in Sodom?
Sexual immorality.
Interesting.
More like they were really for themselves. There was a purpose for their doing things, and in reality it was for themselves.
Okay. Even if you want to say for themselves, who says that was that under the 7 Noahide laws? Are you not allowed to do anything for yourself?
No, but it was for themselves, like inviting guests in, so that they can rob them or things like that. That's what they were doing.
They didn't rob the guests. You see, it's interesting what exactly the problem was in Sodom. There might be some licentiousness in Sodom, like we say sexual immorality, but the fact is a lot of people say, if you look in the Talmud, the sin of Sodom was that they followed the following value: what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. Okay? The Sodomites would have punished you extremely if you committed robbery. Robbery was not tolerated in stone. Absolutely not. Private property was a value in stone, had to be respected. Okay, robbery was not tolerated. You know what also wasn't tolerated in stone? Charity.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, Now, is there any commandment in the 7 notified commandments you have to give charity?
No.
So what did some do wrong? They didn't give charity. See, that's where you get into the issue of values. There's a tension that I'm trying to develop here, in the sense that, no, let's use the word tension right now, but the fact is that God seems to have given us two sources of this understanding of morality. One is by placing something, or through the tree of knowledge of good and evil, placing something within ourselves to have a knowledge of how to make decisions, and then this revelation. But what he gave about our knowledge to make decisions, that was universal. That he gave to every human being, right? Through Adam and Eve,
So
right?
it's like he first gave a prohibition, but then he created situations so that they break the prohibitions.
You see, it seems like a setup. The truth is that there is actually some thought that seems to say that God set them up for something. It was a setup. The fact is, he created a situation. What you say may be true, is that sometimes a child learns something from sort of overstepping his boundary a little bit. He learns something about boundaries. Okay, so there are some indications that there's actually a measure seems to imply that God set them up to and thereby to learn inner morality. Okay, and their own perceptions of good and evil. Okay, why it was done that way? I can't. There obviously must be a reason, or it must be why God did it that way. But that's what God did. But the fact is that the result of that is, and I'm focusing more about the result rather than how that came about. But the result of that is that human beings, all human beings, all the children of Adam and Eve, right, all humanity, have within themselves this aspect of what we call the knowledge of good and evil. Now, in that knowledge is they have this idea of, what I'm trying to say is they have this idea of moral perceptions, moral feelings, okay? But in having these various moral feelings, then we have to make decisions on evaluating them, and that's difficult. That's hard. That takes the mind, that takes judgment, that takes analysis. And that's not so simple. Okay? And people, when they make mistakes, if you see the most evil people, it's why when you bring the example of Hitler, the most evil people are all people who think they are doing right. The most evil people are all people, all think that they are doing right. Stalin, right? Hitler,
Yeah,
Stalin. This is what's necessary. So the fact is that you can actually, actually challenge your own feelings, because it's very difficult to make these decisions. But that's what God gave us with Adam and Eve, and say, listen, this is what life is about. You have to figure out how to make these decisions. You have to know how to live. You have to go forward and make these decisions.
There was a consequence also associated with their actions, which is also in and of itself something that's worthy of being taught, right? Like, in terms of, I think of my child, right? I mean, there's things that, he's not allowed to do or whatever, and sometimes, you think that's going to be a big temptation, but it also gives you an opportunity to say, well, now there's a consequence with that, and it teaches them more about morality, that, hey, I have to make the right decisions. Right.
So this is, and the process of doing this and going through the process. And it's also a concept of what really is good. What really is good, it's something that people lose sight about, is the whole concept of one God. The whole concept of one God has major moral repercussions. The concept of one God really gives us the challenge of morality. When you recognize that tsunami and a sunset are both created by God, a tsunami that will wipe out, people, cause all the havoc that existed in Southeast Asia a few years ago, and a sunset, a beautiful sunset, right, are both from God. You begin to understand what really is the challenge of monotheism. That's why everyone was into idolatry and polytheism. As I like to say, is that people couldn't believe that Mars, the god of war, was under the same guidance as beauty, as Aphrodite. So there was a simple answer: polytheism. War, discussing of war, with Mars. And you ever read a story about how Greeks talk about Mars? He was not a nice guy. Well, what do you think? He was a god of war. He wasn't a nice guy. He was a brute, right? They had no problems. But we'll look what war's about. But then you look at beauty. It's the Aphrodite. It's not the god of war. It's beauty. That's really underlying a lot of aspects of polytheism, right? So okay, but when you take one god and understand everything comes together, you begin to understand that the Eight of Das Tovara, it wasn't the answer, it was now the challenge. Now here's the start of the game. Okay? You are given the early skills, the early internal things to work with, to go forward, to develop. Now it's going to take time. You got to go through life to figure out where you're going to go from here. Okay? Now you have to live. You have to make decisions. Okay? And that's what happened. And part of the time will be is that people will make wrong decisions. Wrong decisions of ego, and they don't. And the fact is, they don't listen to their own intuition certain ways because they become so convinced or whatever, and they just ignore certain aspects. But the truth is, it's the greatest evil. People actually think they're doing good because at the root they see a value, and they just
because they've corrupted now values.
Exactly.
And that's why places like Sodom and Gomorrah and the flood and
Sodom and Gomorrah
Babel had to be meted out with such.
So the fact is that there's those. It's very interesting that there's a whole argument presented by a rabbi in New York, Rabbi Aaron Levine, not the same Aaron Levine in Toronto, if you heard that name, but he's actually Rabbi Dr. Aaron Levine. He's got a doctorate in economics. He's a Rav in New York, and he also is a professor of economics at Yeshiva University, and he's written a whole variety of books on Judaism and economics and business and so forth. And in one of his books, he talks about Sodom. He says the thing about Sodom is Sodom was a society that was actually a functioning society. Sodom had rules, and why were they so strong against charity? You think why they're so strong against charity? Because there's actually a negative consequence of charity. What's the negative consequence of charity? Dependence. More than
welfare state.
Welfare state has a good side to it, but it also has a negative side to it. It can lead to people not carrying their weight. It can lead to people thinking it's okay not to carry their weight, right? It's like the ant and the grasshopper, right? Where the grasshopper doesn't do anything. He says, okay, and at the end, I can't I eat as well? I'm gonna eat. But he didn't do anything. But at the end, if you just give him food, then it just reinforces everyone to be a grasshopper. So therefore, Sodom had a very strong policy: no charity, no charity. That's why it's a very interesting aspect about a perspective on why Sodom, why the Sodomites acted as what they did. People say that the major evil of Sodom was sexuality and licentiousness. Fact is that in this argument, they had a very different argument. What do you think their argument was? They came to Lot was entertaining guests, right? It's basically people came up and the other side says, "What are you doing here? Are these guys paying for their lodging?" Well, they're my guests. Well, it's from Abraham. They're taking the guests. They're my guests. Are they paying for the laundry? For lodging? Come on. If they're paying for lodging, it's fine. It's business. But what do you mean? You're giving something for nothing? That's wrong, right? So what do you think they said? So Lot said, "Listen, what could they give? What do they have to give?" Right? So that's when the people came up with their answer. Anyone can give, right? We can use their bodies. Let's sell their bodies. Don't tell me they have nothing. They have a body. We can use the body. Well, that's where Lot says, wait a second. it's sexual. You have daughters here. We're worried about this. So everyone thinks that Sodomites were into it was homosexuality. No, their point was it's not about sex. It's about the value. People have to pay for what they get. If they want to eat, they have to pay for it. And don't tell me they have anything. They got a body. You can use the body, right? That was their argument. But the fact is they had a strong society. That's why the society had to be destroyed, because because that lesson could not be allowed to exist. This is what comes out of this is all from the analysis of good and evil, learning from it. God, basically, what are we seeing? That God sometimes has to intervene to give a lesson. You guys on your own aren't making the right decisions, so I have to give you a lesson. And the lessons are sometimes pretty drastic, but you got to give a lesson, okay? But the fact is what this leads to is an aspect where God then says, I have a revelation, but He only picks out one nation for that revelation, and that's the question: why only that one nation? Okay, the whole world needs morality. Why only that one nation? Yeah.
Maybe history up to this point showed that humanity doesn't go through.
Doesn't work without revelation. Okay, it's fine. That's possible. It's an interesting statement, and Rabbi Soloveitchik develops this based upon Rav Saadia Gaon. Saadia Gaon was a great rabbi of the 900s. Rabbi Soloveitchik passed away in 1993, and he punches a point that the fact is that our own knowledge of right and wrong will tell us broad statements. You can know that murder is wrong, but at the edges, euthanasia, abortion, right? It becomes more and more difficult. Where does life begin? Where does life end? Where is it that the quality of life becomes an issue in euthanasia? Where is it where life begins? He says that's the issue, and that's where he says you need Torah to clarify it. But that actually was the first issue, my first paragraph in my article, which I mentioned before, called Cloudy Revelation. It says very interesting. Now it's true that if you look in Jewish law, it narrowed down the perspective, gives some answers about euthanasia and some answers about abortion. Right, in our world today, it's like all over the place, right? But if you really look in Jewish law, it doesn't give you a very direct answer. There are disagreements vis-a-vis euthanasia and vis-a-vis abortion in Jewish law. Okay, major disagreements, and different rabbis have different answers for different cases. So the point is, even after Revelation, you're not given all the answers. But what happens is that for some reason, God wanted to give over a revelation that had some kind of purpose, but He felt it was necessary to give revelation over to one nation because it was still necessary for the world to continue doing what it was doing in the moral challenges. See, there's challenges of trying to figure out what to do. There's a value in trying to figure out what to do within the perspective of much more of the world of Adam, the world without revelation, without the world without Torah. There's a mechanic. There is something that has to be done in that world. Okay, there is a value to philosophy and ethics. There's a value to trying to figure out things with a more minimal direction from revelation, right? Through something like the Noahide Code. But there was another specific nation that was given the task to go through a different dynamic, and that dynamic had more intense revelation. Okay, and that's really what happens here, because what happens with revelation for the Jewish people, it was not a revelation that gave the answers. It was a revelation that actually changed some of the way the discussion went. It created more issues.
Methodology.
Okay, and what happened with that is it also introduced ideas of right and wrong that were not necessarily coming from our own moral perspectives, and that brought in the concept of God. See, in Jewish thought, there's a major distinction between what we call mitzvot slichliot and chukim. Mitzvot slichliot are laws that we would sort of know about even if God never revealed them, such as murder, theft. And then there are other laws which are called chukim, which are laws that no person would feel any moral perspective with, except that God somehow said, don't do it. Okay, such as don't eat pork. Okay? Chukim, basically, those are laws that basically are only for the Jewish people. Right? The other laws are much more universal. The point is that there's a different dynamic in there. Okay? First of all, God gives revelation, and also affects the mitzvah sichliyut. It also affects the laws that do work within the moral perspectives of humanity. Okay? And then you have to figure out how does revelation work in that regard. But then there are other laws that God gave from Revelation, and these are laws that say, listen, same thing you said beforehand, that you're going to give something to the people that they have no feeling about whatsoever. Right? Don't eat pork. You have any feelings about eating pork? I don't have any feelings about eating pork. Right? Maimonides makes this distinction, and he says, what are you supposed to feel if you see someone eating pork? You're supposed to look at it and say, gee, I'm sure it tastes good. Personally, I don't feel bad. Gee, I'd like to have a piece. I can't because God said not to. But I have no moral feelings towards not eating pork. None whatsoever. Right? Okay?
It grows on you and it becomes part of you.
Okay. And that according to Rabbi may be a problem. Fact is that may be a problem. Because he says specifically, if you see pork, you're supposed to say, looks good. Right? I see a bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwich, I'm supposed to look at it and say, looks good, looks really good. Then there with a non-Jewish friend, he's eating the Big Mac, and I say, I really would like one. Yeah, it looks really good. I have no idea, but it looks good to me. It looks good to me. I'd love to have one. What can I do? God said not to eat it. But go ahead, please enjoy yourself. No, I have no negative feelings. A Big Mac, it's great. Okay? God told me not to. What can I say? He doesn't like me. He wants me not to eat Big Macs. I don't know, right? But the fact is that creates a different tension. That creates a different aspect. The point is when you bring revelation into the mix, especially Jewish understanding of revelation, which is also supposed to not really, suffocate the human thought process. See, the way I presented the aspect of morality, it really is challenging to human beings to decide what's right and wrong. It's really an issue. You have to think. Right? What do you think? God doesn't want you to think? Of course you have to think. Right? Every human being is created in the image of God. Right? What? God's not, God thinks. Right? Created in the image of God. So you have to think. You have to determine what's right and wrong. It's not easy to make those decisions because it's challenging to make those decisions because becoming godlike is challenging. Okay? You have to think. You have to move ahead. However, the fact is that for some reason, God said, listen, I have another plan for a special nation, for a specific nation, to have a different dynamic. Okay? And you need both dynamics. You need dynamics of the general world, and you need the dynamics of the Jewish people. For some reason, they have a different dynamic that's supposed to affect the rest of the world, but it's not supposed to be covered exactly by the rest of the world because it's a different dynamic. And that dynamic is this dynamic I told you about. Like one example is this idea of having laws that don't necessarily have that moral context to it. Okay? And then dealing with the fact that you are being told things that have no explanation, have no feeling. And that's developed some aspect of a relationship with God. Okay, which is somewhat different. And then from that development, Jews are supposed to share what has happened through their analysis to the rest of the world. So the point is, and of course, anyone in the world, if they want to, can become Jewish and part of that dynamic. But if one chooses not to become Jewish, there is another dynamic that the rest of the world is supposed to go through, and that's significant as well. And those two dynamics are necessary in terms of developing this world, because there's an aspect of really what happens is there's a relationship between humanity and God, and there's also humanity's own development, right? A lot of times religious people think only in terms of relating to God. You know, there's certain religious people, like go home and, you know, they think they're being, holy by saying something like, I'll go home and pray about it, right? Like if I go home and I'll go home and ask God for the answer. You know something? God has the answer, right?
Yes.
But the point is that maybe you're supposed to try and figure out the answer on your own. Maybe you're supposed to try and work a little bit at it, because maybe God wants you to develop yourself a little bit. The fact is that there's some challenges that we have as human beings, and the point is that we have to meet challenges. But the fact is that in a certain way there's a dynamic of developing our own moral consciousness and becoming thereby more godlike, and then there's this other type of aspect, which is to further a connection to God and figure out how to relate to God, right? That can come about through specific commands that otherwise don't have any reasons, such as don't eat pork, but that dynamic was specific to a certain group who then, because you don't want to totally, get people not involved in the other dynamic. So you sort of need both groups around. See the general humanity still involved in the challenge that all humanity is supposed to work, because we're all supposed to become more and more godlike. And then in a certain way, the Jewish nation was given a unique dynamic, okay, from Revelation, which created the unique reality, this dynamic in terms of laws that have no law, and then also a dynamic where it extended or created new tensions and new issues in laws that come about from morality as well. Okay, so it really developed it, but it really developed a different type of dynamic. So that's anyway. So what I was trying to show was that a lot of times that the fact is that there is a rhyme and reason. I really would just want to give us basic ideas here. It's obviously a lot more to talk about and a lot more to develop here, because I'm sort of feeling that I'm just sort of giving the opening little tidbits on this. But the fact is there's a reason why God has constructed the world the way He has, why He's constructed the moral universe the way He has. And the fact is that there is a challenge of trying to figure out, the real issue behind it is the challenge of trying to figure out what is right and wrong, what is morality, how to look at it. It's not easy. You have to know the challenge, and you have to work hard to come to answers. Yeah.
So then, if the idea is to come to this sort of moral consciousness, then really the 7 laws of Noah are really just a starting point.
Yes.
And certainly not an ending point.
Right.
And
absolutely.
You could think of things like charity or respect for parents and things like this that are incumbent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. The 7 laws are the starting point. They create the original dynamic, but obviously there are other aspects of morality. The 7 laws of Noah are the aspect of the revelational aspect in the dynamic of finding out how to be a godlike person in the general world. And then the Jews were given another aspect of revelation, because they have another task, and that task is a little bit more complicated for whatever reason it is, but it's a different type of task. But the fact is you have to first understand the Noahide task, which is the task is to develop that moral consciousness. And the moral consciousness comes about through thought. Philosophy is not a negative thing. Philosophy is extremely important. Maimonides thought Aristotle was the greatest mind below the level of prophecy. That's what Maimonides described Aristotle. The fact is that people are supposed to think. They're supposed to deal with issues. Now, is it possible people may get thrown off? Yes, it's difficult. Evil comes about through people making wrong decisions. It's very important to look at. It's very, it's something. Excuse me. It's something that really always bothers me, the way people look at evil. And like you take, even George Bush, when he made that statement about, he couldn't believe that Osama bin Laden was a religious person, and he made, thank you, when he made that statement that Osama bin Laden was a religious person, he says, no, a religious person will never act that way. He has a certain definition of religious, but the fact is that usually great evil usually has a person who's so convinced himself that he is doing something good, and that's a problem. That really is a problem, because the fact is that that's the challenge we have. And that's why it's very important to have a little bit of doubt. One of the important things that I think comes about is the aspect of doubt. People, people think doubt is a bad thing, right? The truth is when you doubt, people think, well, you're doubting God? No, I'm not doubting God. When you doubt, who's the one who's weak? Is it God who's weak? No, it's you. You're the one who doubts. You're the one who doesn't know the answer. You're writing on a test. I don't know. Is it A or B? Right? And I narrowed down multiple choice, A, B, C, D. I know it's A, B. I'm not sure it was A and B. Is the problem the teacher? The problem the question? No, the problem is you. You don't know the answer. So if you have doubt, that's what's wrong with fanatics. Fanatics is, I'm so convinced I'm right. I'm so absolutely sure I'm right. Why? Because I'm going to kill all these people. Right? I'm so right, but, anyone who's so right, something, how do you know you're right? Maybe a little bit of doubt. What, the doubt in yourself, knowing you aren't God and that you can make mistakes, and you have to learn, and maybe you're not 100% right. Now, you still have to be principled. You still have to think, if I really think I'm right, I have to do this. But a little, I'm not saying the doubt should totally negate any action you do, but a little bit of doubt. A little bit of doubt. That's what our challenge is, because the challenge is to figure out how to grow, how to be a better person.
Okay? A little bit of doubt would actually give you your humanity.
Yes, absolutely.
And the lack which makes you move. What is doubt? It's a lack of knowledge, lack of whatever.
Right.
It will make you move.
Right. Many people think that the Noahide laws, a lot of people think that 27 laws, so forth. The whole world of ethics, philosophy is before you, because you have to think. You still have to think to figure out what the best way to live is. The point is, you are given some parameters. Like, it's like, hey, there really is a God. Okay, that's an important parameter. The idea of one God, the idea that you have to bring things together into a oneness. So, it's very important. This whole perspective is something that came about through really looking at the story of Adam and Eve, which in a certain way is a universal story, and really should be part of universal consciousness. Adam and Eve's kids knew, there was an Adam and Eve. You know what I mean? The fact is that's part of it. And then there's another aspect which I really didn't get into in much depth, which is the unique dynamic of revelation that created another dynamic for the Jewish nation. Okay, a dynamic which is then supposed to be shared with the world, but not to take away from the first dynamic.
Can I ask you a question? The fact that revelation was given to Jewish people, does it make it less of revelation for the nations?
Well,
if you see that somebody
they didn't participate in it.
They didn't participate, they knew it's happening.
Yeah, so therefore that's why what Maimonides says is they have to accept the Noahide code based upon revelation. But the fact is there's still a difference. See, one of the things that Judaism likes to point out is that the revelation at Sinai was to the entire nation. It wasn't to one person. In every other religion, the revelation went to two guys, back door, back room, someplace, and so forth and so forth. And then the guy comes out and says, "We just had this revelation, and I got two witnesses, Bill and John, who are my cousins, things like that, right?" Okay, the point is that the revelation was the whole nation. Well, the revelation wasn't to the whole world. Okay, God can speak to the whole, because the point is there's a different dynamic, and there's a unique task to the Jewish people because of that dynamic. But that's not to take away from the fact there's a dynamic in the entire world. We're all supposed to grow. We're all supposed to develop an aspect of becoming more godlike through the development of our moral intuitions.